Blood in the circulatory system. Please take a moment to review the learning objectives before completing this presentation. The circulatory system is responsible for distributing oxygen from the lung to the tissues of the body. Because the energy produced in our bodies is primarily from aerobic glycolysis, or the breakdown of sugar using oxygen, it is important that a steady stream of oxygen be delivered to the tissues. As its name implies, the circulatory system is a circle. You can start anywhere, and you'll always wind up back where you began. We'll start today in the heart, which is the primary organ of the circulatory system. Blood flows from the body to the right atrium, and then into the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, it is pumped through the pulmonary artery to the lungs. In the alveolar spaces of the lungs, the hemoglobin in the red cells picks up oxygen. From the lung, it then goes to the pulmonary vein and is pumped back to the left atrium of the heart. From the left atrium, it passes through to the left ventricle. This is the most muscular portion of the heart and is responsible for providing the pressure to push the blood through the rest of the body. From the left ventricle, the blood passes into the aorta, which is the largest artery in the body. From here, it progresses through a series of arteries that decrease in size until it gets to the arterioles. The arterioles are simply very small arteries. From there, it passes into the capillary bed. In the capillaries, oxygen is released to the tissues. From the capillary beds, it then finds its way into the venules, which are very small veins, and works its way through increasingly sized veins until it empties into the vena cava. Blood from the lower body empties into the inferior vena cava, and from the upper body empties into the superior vena cava. From the vena cava, it returns to the right atrium and begins the journey again. There are 3 basic types of blood vessels. The blood in each may vary just a little bit in its composition, so some tests must be run on certain types of blood. The first blood vessel is an artery. An artery is defined as a vessel which carries blood away from the heart. In general, this carries oxygen-rich blood, except for the pulmonary artery, which carries blood from the heart to the lung. Arterial blood is primarily used for arterial blood gases. The arteries themselves have very strong walls. They have to be able to withstand the pressure that the heart exerts on the wall of the artery as the blood is pumped through the body. When you are palpating for a vein, you can tell an artery because you will feel a pulse. Although in patients with severe atherosclerosis, this may sometimes be difficult to feel. Veins are the main vessel used for obtaining blood for laboratory testing. A vein is defined as a vessel which carries blood to the heart, and except for the pulmonary vein, they generally carry non-oxygenated blood. The walls of a vein are much more spongy and not as thick, and there will be no pulse in a vein. Capillaries are the microscopic link between arteries and veins. Many capillaries are only wide enough for a single blood cell to pass through at a time. They contain a mixture of arterial and venous blood, and they are accessed by dermal puncture. In dermal puncture, we cut the skin and allow the blood to flow out. The primary veins used in venipuncture can be found in the arm. They are readily accessible, close to the surface, and the arm is easy to manipulate. Any vein that can be found in the body can be used, though some will require permission from a doctor. Except the jugular, only doctors get to stick that one. The median cubital and median cephalic, found in the antecubital fossa, which is a fancy way of saying the inside of the elbow, are the most common veins used. They are large, run down the center of the arm. The basilic is a large vein which runs down the side of the arm on the same side as the little finger. It's important to remember that just because the textbook The drawings or the anatomy class says that the vein runs in a particular place. Every person's anatomy is a little bit different. The vein may run in a little bit different place or a little bit different direction. There are a number of superficial veins lying close to the surface of the arm. These may be easier to see and to feel. Be careful when sticking them, as they may not be strong enough to support a venipuncture. Many patients have deep veins. These are much more difficult to feel and may be more challenging to puncture. The blood is made of a variety of components. The plasma is the liquid portion of the blood. It takes up approximately 50 to 60% of the volume of our blood. The formed elements come from the bone marrow. Red cells, also known as erythrocytes, contain the oxygen-carrying component hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is basically a large protein molecule with an iron suspended in the middle of it. 4 of these hook together and are therefore able to carry 4 oxygen per molecule of hemoglobin. There are approximately 5 million red blood cells per milliliter of blood, and a milliliter of blood is a little under a quarter teaspoon. Red blood cells occupy 30 to 50% of the volume of blood. After they are released from the bone marrow, they live approximately 120 days. White blood cells, also known as leukocytes, are divided into 5 types. Their primary function is to fight infection. Neutrophils, the most abundant white cell, are active in fighting bacterial infection and also found an inflammatory response. Lymphocytes are more active in fighting viral infection and other immune-mediated processes. The monocytes are basically the bloodstream's garbage men. They are most active in the tissues as macrophages, where they phagocytize or eat the debris. They then transport this throughout the body, where the reusable components can be recycled and the waste can be processed for elimination. The granules of the eosinophil contain chemicals which are active in allergies and also help to fight off parasitic infection. Although in this area of the country, we don't have a whole lot of parasites. Basophils are active in the tissues as mast cells. They release histamines. There are approximately 5 to 10,000 white cells per milliliter of blood, and they live anywhere from a few hours to a few weeks after release from the bone marrow. Platelets, or thrombocytes, are not actually cells at all, but instead they are remnants of cytoplasm from a cell in the bone marrow called a megakaryocyte. These cell fragments are responsible for blood clotting. You have approximately 140 to 400,000 per milliliter of blood, and they are active for 9 to 12 days after they are released from the bone marrow. The plasma is the liquid portion of the blood. In the laboratory, if this is allowed to clot in the tube, the liquid portion comes off as serum. Most laboratory testing is performed on either serum or plasma. The major function of plasma is transport. Some things, such as cells, simply float in it, and other things will dissolve in it, such as nutrients, waste products, and functional proteins. The last thing we want to discuss in this presentation briefly is blood typing. There are 4 major human blood types: A, B, AB, and O. It's vital to remember that transfusing with incompatible blood can kill. Many blood banks employ extra steps when drawing patients for blood transfusion, and you must be very careful to follow these exactly. It's always preferred to give patients the identical blood type when you can, but in cases where this is not feasible or possible, type A patients can receive either type A or type O. Type B patients can receive type B or type O. Type AB patients aren't picky at all. They'll take any of the 4 blood types. Type O is quite exclusive and will only accept type O. The Rh factor, or the negative and positive portion of your blood type, is important in that Rh negative patients should get Rh negative blood. Rh positive patients, on the other hand, can safely receive either Rh positive or Rh negative blood. The universal donor, O negative, can be given to anyone in an emergency, but it's important to remember that there are always risks associated with transfusion, and there are other blood groups which can produce atypical or abnormal antibodies, which can make transfusing a patient difficult and dangerous.